Welcome, everyone. I want to begin by saying thank you to everyone who's joining us today from across the country and across the world. I'm Alexander McCoben, the CEO here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc., and just want to say how much I appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us today. Today, we're going to be joined by Brian Buck and Kwame Dow to explore win-win approaches to negotiation. Before I introduce them, though, I want to give a backdrop to this conversation because, as many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of capitalism in business. It's a movement of business leaders around the world working to improve both the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement. Every week, we're offering virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in their leadership journeys and the best practices of those conscious capitalists in our network. So today's gathering is going to run for about 45 minutes. Brian and Kwame will be in conversation for about 30 minutes, and then we'll transition to audience questions during the last 10 to 15 minutes of our sessions. So at any point, please type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you have anything you want to ask either Brian or Kwame. And if you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. An entrepreneur, business owner, and Fortune 500 executive, Scott Work North America CEO Brian Buck brings 25 years of experience to the negotiating table. His insights into the conflicts that exist around time, money, and relationships, and how these three impact the value of deals has helped to transform the way that many organizations and individuals negotiate. Brian holds an MBA from UCLA's Anderson School of Business and lives in Southern California with his wife and 2 daughters. And as well, we're joined by Kwame Dow, a sought-after human resources senior executive who has spent 20 plus years working for companies such as Essia Health, DreamWorks Nova, and American Botanical Pharmacy. In his roles, he's shaped and driven company culture, maximized employee performance, and impacted organizational profitability. Kwame holds a degree from Lincoln University and lives in Los Angeles with his wife and daughter. People continue to be his passion, and human resources his vehicle to change the world. As he says, in everything you do, you have to first be of service. Welcome, Brian and Kwame. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Alexander. Boy, those are, I was looking around for a second, Kwame, of like, who are those guys? I guess that's us, if you will. So.
Look, I was certainly listening and I was like, wait, is that Brian Buck and Kwame Dow?
I think so. I think so. So in full disclosure, Kwame and I have known, we were talking about this beforehand. We've known each other since 2005. So it's been a long time since we've known each other. It's good to see you. So,
well, look, Brian, it's good to see you. And I think we were definitely pre-gray hair. That's how long we've known each other, right? Pre-gray hair and maybe some hair.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
Well, there you go. Mine continues to escape.
Well, look, Alexander, thanks for the warm welcome and the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with my old friend, Brian Buck. About conscious negotiation as it relates to conscious capitalism, and really win-win negotiations. So, Brian, look, I know we've got a limited amount of time, so let's go ahead and dive right in. You know, when I think about this country and, in fact, the world, and how, in some cases, it's polarizing, it's hard for me to really think about win-win negotiations actually being a real thing. Yeah. And, you know, one of the tenets of conscious capitalism is really a higher purpose. So talk to me a little bit about Scott Work and your higher purpose.
Sure. Well, as you know, you and I have lots of conversations around how to solve the world's problems. And it seems to always come down to how are we resolving conflict? And at the core of what Scott Work does, it is about resolving conflict. That's what negotiation is all about. And our higher purpose is to transform the way the world negotiates. And the reason for that is I can draw a straight line from what's happening in the boardroom to what's going on in our neighborhoods, in our streets, and everywhere else. And the way that we resolve conflicts today is it's not being done in a constructive way that allows everybody to benefit from that resolution. In fact, there's more of a mentality of, in order for me to win, you have to lose. So there's more of that mentality that happens. And we believe there's a better way to do that. In fact, we study about $80 trillion worth of commercial transactions every single year. And what I can tell you unequivocally, when we talk to all those deal makers, is that only 23% can identify the long-term value they've created out of their deals. And then even more interesting, only 21% say that the relationship with the other party was strengthened during that negotiation. So to put that differently, is you've got nearly 80% of deal makers out there not creating value and destroying relationships. And that's why our higher purpose is to transform how people are doing that, because you can't heal a country, you can't heal a society without us getting better in the boardroom, my personal opinion, getting better at how to resolve conflict.
Got it. So really value and relationships are at the core of what you do. But again, going back to my point in the beginning, right? Value, when I think about value, I think about value as it relates to me. When I think about relationships, I don't know that we're in the world where we're thinking about long-term relationships. We're thinking about, what can I get right now? So how do you get over that?
Well, look, this becomes a mindset. And this is one of the things that I love about the conscious capitalism movement, is that it's taking a stakeholder orientation, if you will. Let's look at all the stakeholders in the picture. And the approach to negotiating that we take is exactly that. So first and foremost, if you think about how most of us learn how to negotiate, it was, we watched somebody else, trial and error. Maybe we were influenced by, Gordon Gekko and Greed is Good or whatever else. But we walk into a negotiation really thinking about mostly ourselves. That's what most people do. And so with that, it immediately creates a competitive environment right off the bat. This is the epitome of a distributed negotiation, where one party has to win, or one party has to lose in order for one party to win. That's the mentality of how we've typically approached it. But what that does to a ongoing negotiation with the rest, let's think about this for a second. I walk into a deal. I'm completely focused on me. Here's all the things that I need. And I'm going to tell you, Kwame, here's what I need. You need to give me this, you need to give me that, you need to do this, you do that, I'll charge you this. Immediately put you on the defensive. Now you start thinking, well, what about me?
Right.
So now you have to start thinking about you, because the other side's only thinking about themselves. And so we go through this tension. And at the end of this deal, there's a feeling that somebody won, somebody lost. Now, the party that lost, when it comes time again to renegotiate, what do you think the party that lost is going to do?
Well, they're going to try to get what they lost in the front end.
Yeah.
Right?
And then some, right? I'll show you. Now it's my turn.
Sure.
And then what happens? Now we get this super competitive environment that starts to go on. And actually that next negotiation takes a little bit longer, because people are less likely to share information, less likely to be collaborative, less likely to really be looking out for each other. And the relationship continues to decline, and it becomes destructive behavior that we're participating in. And so your negotiations over time in that environment get longer and longer and longer. And over time, you lose a client, you have to go find new vendors. We have entire RFP processes out there because relationships have degraded to a point where we're just tired of the people we're working with. Let's go find somebody else.
Sure.
And it's those sorts of things that happen. And that's what's gone on in our typical business world. And there's a different way. There's a different path forward to where you can put value and relationship on a pedestal and really work towards preserving both of those.
So Brian, look, I got to do my job in asking the question, how do you do it? Because look, I think I'm a pretty good negotiator, but I'm generally trying to come out of it with the things that I'm looking for. So how do you do it?
Well, what I would say is, first and foremost, is it takes you have to be mindful about the other side. And as simple as that sounds, if you sit down and first start to prepare, thinking about what the other side wants, what the other side wants to avoid, really what it is they need out of this, you start to put yourself in a mindset of really thinking about the other side's needs. And you have to do that in order to create a deal that both parties can actually put into play. Because that's really the goal. Ultimately, I was asked this question recently of, what's the top goal of a negotiator? And what I told them was, it is to put a deal in play that both parties are willing to support. It's not about winning at all costs. It's not about getting everything that you need, but both parties have to be willing to put this into play, in which case that means you have to really understand what the other party wants and needs and what's important to them and what their motivators are. So it starts at the preparation of just putting yourself in their shoes and thinking about what's most important to them.
Now, Brian, look, I'm an HR person, right? I've got lots of other things I need to be doing versus, preparing for a negotiation. I read this article a while back that, men with beards and bald heads have a better position at the negotiating table. So can I just go in the way that I am? Because what you're telling me to do right now sounds like a lot of work.
What are you telling me?
Well, you're almost there.
I'm almost there. Thanks. I feel really good about myself right now. Look, you know as well as I do. Like you, I used to really think that I was this great negotiator. I come out of marketing and advertising. One of the things that we're really good at is helping people see a different point of view, a different path. So we use a lot of persuasion to get the things that we want. I mistook that for actually negotiating. But what I discovered as soon as I found out what negotiating was all about and realized actually I knew nothing about it and really had to become a student, negotiating at the end of the day is about, it's a trading activity. It's about trading things of lesser importance to you in return for things that are of higher importance to you. And you're trading with somebody else who objectively needs to do the exact same thing. They need to trade things of lesser importance to try and get things of higher importance to them. You have to understand what the other party wants and needs in order to do that. So, oftentimes what I get from people first and foremost is, oh, I know everything there is to know about negotiating. I got this, let's go. And inevitably they get into the conversation totally focused on themselves.
Right.
And so they start asking questions right off the bat about how to basically fulfill their order. So tell me your budget. When do you want to do this? What are the things I need to know in order to give you a quote? Those sorts of things. And that's a very self-centered me way to go. The best place to start any negotiation, in my point of view, outside of structuring the appropriate expectations and doing all that, is actually to go in, and I'm going to get curious about you. So if you and I were negotiating, which we've done before, I'm going to start asking you questions. What's important to you? What's your motivators? Why is this important to you? I really want to understand what's going on in your world. And even I'll dig even deeper, like even help me understand how we even got to this and so forth and so on. So that way I can really understand why, the why part of this deal, not the what part of the deal. And oftentimes we ask lots of questions around the what, not the whys. Good negotiators, conscious negotiators, spend an inordinate amount of time talking to the other side about the other side. And then through that, they can start to discover all the tradables that exist to create that deal, that proposal that addresses both parties' issues. And that's really one of the key factors. You have to put proposals and deals out there that address everybody's issues, not just your own, not just that selfie proposal, if you will.
So that goes back to what you were saying earlier in terms of really not it being me, but more of a we, right?
Right.
So as you're doing that and you're gathering information, certainly you're making that other person feel comfortable in the conversation, and you're trying to get to that win-win. What about you do all this prep work? What about when you discover something that maybe you didn't anticipate discovering in the conversation? How do you pivot in the middle of the negotiation if you need to pivot?
Yeah, that happens, I think, a lot to us, because we think about the preparation piece. Even though I can start with thinking about you and putting you in my center of focus first and foremost, most of the time what I'm doing is making assumptions about you. I'm making assumptions about your motivations, assumptions about your priorities, assumptions about your needs. So when you get into the negotiation stuff or finally sit down with the other party, And it may not be a sit down now. It could be you're going to send emails back and forth. You may text, get on a call like this, whatever it may be. But when you start to engage, you want to test all of those assumptions that you make, because that's the worst thing. You and I have talked about this. If we go to some of the social issues that are out there, all the assumptions that people make about the other side,
Yep.
and just how wrong they are, right? But yet, even though we're wrong, we have the hubris to move forward on a flawed strategy, if you will, based on flawed assumptions. As a negotiator, that's the death nail. Like, you can't go in and move forward based on flawed assumptions. So you got to go in and test those first and foremost. So you go in and we start asking questions about, now something may come out where you realize, oh, wow, that was a really bad assumption on my part. So in a commercial world, let's go this way with it. Very common trade is we exchange volume for pricing considerations. The more I give, the cheaper I should pay. Per unit. So let's say you get into the conversation and you start to find out that a volume is not a cost driver. It's not a price driver. I can't give you more volume to get a better price. And if your strategy was predicated all on that, you have to get out of the room and reevaluate your strategy. Almost immediately what I would do,
that's the walk away. Yeah.
Well, it is and it's not. I mean, the walk away in our parlance would be you're literally walking away from the deal. You've reached deadlock and we're walking away. I consider this more of a pause, if you will. It's hold on, let me reconsider what we're doing. And this happens in business all the time. You get, you and I are talking and I discover something new. I can simply say, hey, this is great. I need to go off and consider that. Can we schedule more time later? It's not hard to get out of the room, but the advice to deal makers is, what you see skilled deal makers do is when new information comes out, they pause, they reconsider, reevaluate, and reorientate their strategy based upon the stakeholder that they're dealing with.
So the pause is actually okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I think about negotiations, and again, I'm going to go back to this we, right, and this win-win-win. So yours is to gather information, make that person feel comfortable, right? So when you gather all the information, what if you find out that really what they want is more than you can give? And it's not necessarily maybe a one-to-one in terms of, all right, well, I can give you one, you give me one, and now we're whole. Maybe it's I have to give you 5 and you have to give me 1 to get to the deal. So how what do you do?
You bring up a really interesting point, because I think when we talk about win-win or win-win-win, the implication is that this is a balanced value to all parties. And I want to be very clear, that's absolutely not the case. You and I could negotiate a deal where monetarily you're getting 90% of the value out of this deal.
I like that deal.
As long as you and I are both willing to put that deal into play, then that's okay. There are often times where I may not be the beneficiary of the monetary value of the deal. But then again, skilled negotiators, conscious negotiators, what they do is they understand what are the objectives of this deal to begin with. What is going to be important? It may not be just the money. There's other elements that we need to consider. There's all kinds of factors. Sometimes we get so focused on the money piece that we can't see how we can do other elements. So for instance, there could be a situation, given that one-to-one thing that you were just talking about, somebody wants to pay $1 less, that means I have to charge them $1 less. Not necessarily. There might be something else that I may want out of this relationship that would justify me not charging you that additional $1, if you will. And I might be able to look for other value drivers out of this that would be just as important to me as what that $1 represented. I think oftentimes what happens too is we get into a deal and somebody makes a very unrealistic demand of us. Kwame, I like what you're talking about as an HR guy. I want you to come work for me for free. Hey, what a great deal that is. Nick would love me for that one.
Yeah, free doesn't work for me, Brian.
Free doesn't work for you. Free doesn't work for me either. So there's ways that we can deal with that, and oftentimes I think our gut reaction is to just put up the stop sign and say no, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. Skilled negotiators, particularly if they've spent the time really thinking about all the stakeholders involved, start to look for other ways to say yes, quite honestly. You and I were talking recently about a silly scenario about if you and I went downtown to the tallest building in LA. I think it's the U.S. Bank building,
Mhm.
which by comparison, tall buildings, that's not really a tall building. If anybody knows LA, it's tall, but not tall.
It's
But anyways,
tall.
if we went,
Tall-ish.
it's tall enough. You and I go up there, we get on the roof, we stand on the edge, and I turn to you and as my dear friend, and I say, Kwame, I'd like you to jump.
I'm sorry, Brian, you want me to do what?
I want you to jump.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, that's usually the reaction that we get from, that's our gut reaction. First of all, I would never ask you to jump, but sometimes in a deal, we get people that ask those ridiculous, jump off the building questions. And our natural response is to say no. There's a different way and a different approach that is really about, well, what is it that you would need to actually make that jump? If you were to think about this differently, and I were to say, okay, Kwame, what do you need to make this jump? What would be some of the things that you would need, out of curiosity?
Well, I need you to adjust that offer free that you mentioned. So I need money.
Okay.
I need you
You need money.
Yeah.
Small bills, offshore account. Got it.
Yes, please.
Okay. What else do you need?
I need a jetpack. I need a
You need a
jet. I can put
jetpack.
it on my back, so when I jump, I'm good. Right.
So you just kind of glide down. Okay. What else do you need?
If I can't have a jetpack, maybe how about like a parachute, like a base jump?
Okay. Perfect. And why don't we go ahead and get you one of those big mattresses? Why don't we also get you a safety harness? Like, really make sure you're safe when you make this jump.
Now you're talking.
Okay. So money, safety, harnesses, jetpacks, all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
When we're given those unrealistic, demands, if you will, instead of saying, no, if we were to go, yes, here's how I can do that, and you were to tell me, sure, Brian, I can jump. If you do all these things, I'll jump for you.
Yeah. Now
who's in control of that conversation first and foremost now? You or me?
Well, me, because I've given you everything that I want, and I would think that you're in a position of, I don't know if it's weakness, but now you've got to fulfill all that. Can you do all that, Brian?
Yeah. Now I've got a problem. And as ridiculous as that sounds, that scenario is, what you've in effect done is you found a way to yes. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about why is that coming up in a win-win-win conversation? Well, the reason why that's coming up is it forces you to really think about your needs, but also the needs of the other side. And so if we can start to do that, and instead of trying to find ways to say no, which as soon as you say no, now we create a competitive environment again. Now the other side starts thinking about what it is they need. How do I win? How do I get the things I want? We start to build on the things that are most important to the other side and to ourselves, and we start to put those out there. Now we've created a collaboration that we can work on together. And again, the building thing is ridiculous. So that would be more of a blocking technique where I would go, Kwame, you're asking something ridiculous of me, and you go, yes, because you're asking something ridiculous to me. Okay, I get it. But in a normal negotiation, oftentimes things are put out there and we'll hear it and we go, I don't like that. I don't like that. Instead, pause for a second and go, how can I say yes to what the stakeholder wants? You may not be able to give everything, but it gets you again thinking about the stakeholder that's involved in the conversation, and the dynamics change completely.
So how can I say yes? We want to work to that, right? And it sounds like no is really the beginning of that's really where the negotiation actually starts. Yeah. I mean, Chuck, so I think about growing up in Long Island and, asking my dad for something and him saying no. And I'm like, well, I didn't really walk away. I just said, but Dad,
that's right.
The reason that I want
all kids have this amazing innate ability to go, oh, you said no, thank you, I'm glad you said no. And we run into negotiators all the time. So we do 3 different things for our clients at the end of the day. We can negotiate on their behalf, literally sit at the table and do the negotiation for them. We can coach them through their own deals, or we can teach them the techniques to do it themselves. Almost 9 times out of 10, when we sit down with teams to coach them or teams to develop them, there is a trepidation around no. We fear no. And I think that gets amplified if you're trying to be mindful and conscientious. that no becomes almost paralyzing. We don't want to say no because that means I'm not able to fulfill the needs of the other side. I'm not being mindful, if you will, or all these other things. In fact, I would say the exact opposite is that what no does is it helps you understand a limit that you have reached. And now your job is to understand why that no exists and what you can do to potentially turn it into yes, but what can you do now to help the other side achieve the things that they want? In a conscious world, I want people to be laser focused on their objectives, flexible on their strategy, and you can be conscientious and still be firm on the things that you want to achieve, but it's how you do it. That's the differentiator between those that are practicing a win-lose type of negotiation versus those practicing a win-win-win negotiation. It's always keeping the other side in the forefront of their thoughts.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Now, again, I want to go back to the point where I said I feel like I'm a really good negotiator, right? And I think about Alexander was asking me about the books behind me and the ones that I really enjoy. And for me, they're always kind of self-help and development books. Sure. And I read this book a while ago about talents, which are things that are naturally that you're born with, right, and things that are learned. So are you telling me that anybody can learn to be a good negotiator? Or is it a talent you have to have?
So we've done a lot of study on what makes, is there such thing as a born negotiator? The reality is there's probably only two attributes that kind of rise to the top that say, if you have these attributes, you have a better propensity to be a good negotiator, but it's not the end all be all. And the two attributes that exist, you want to take a wild guess? Beard and bald head. Perfect. Beard and bald head. No, not even close. It is, first of all, curiosity. That's the first one. If you are innately curious, so when you see things, you tend to ask why. That's a great quality and trait for a negotiator. Now, what if you're not naturally curious? Well, that's something you do have to develop. You have to develop a sense of curiosity. You have to train yourself to ask why before you defend or attack or persuade or whatever else you're going to do. So curiosity is the first one. The second one, second attribute is creativity. Skilled negotiators have to think creatively. Now, as we talked about the silly building example, it takes a lot of creativity to sit there in the moment and think about jetpack, or whatever else that you were coming up with. I mean, that's creative muscle that you can build. And so with that, as we develop negotiators, if you bring those skills to the table, it becomes easier. But if you don't, yes, negotiating is a learned process. It's a learned skill. It is something that everybody can develop. Some will be better than others, but it is something we can all develop and be better at.
Awesome. So look, Brian, you shared a lot of really great information with us today, and I know we're coming somewhat to the close, but if somebody wanted to get in touch with you to learn a little bit more, how would they do that?
Well, you can just, not that we're promoting us, but just connect with me on LinkedIn and you can go from there. What I would tell you is if you want to start changing the way that you're negotiating now, you want to become a more conscious negotiator, there's three things that you can start doing right now. And I'm going to talk about this in terms of a leader and somebody on the front lines. So if you're a leader and your people are coming to you, getting ready to talk to you about a deal or are talking to you about a deal, as a leader, the first thing that you can do is just ask them about the other party. What does the other party want? What do they want? What do they want to avoid? And listen to their answer. If the answer is something trite, like, well, they want the deal or they want us to do the work for them, then that means your team hasn't really spent a lot of time thinking about the other side. But if they can articulate to you their motivations, their priorities, all the elements that are important to them, if they can really demonstrate they've given some thought, then your team's on a good path. For those of you on the front line, you need to ask yourself that question before you walk into the room. Do I know what's important to them? Do I know what's motivating them? Do I know what they want? Do I know what they want to avoid? If I know all of those things, then I'm probably in a pretty good spot. So the first thing is just ask about the other party. The second thing I would say is find ways to say yes. No is a very competitive win-loss path. Yes is a collaborative path, can create win-win-win. And again, I want to be very clear. You may not always be able to say yes to everything, but if your first step is, let me think about what I could do there. What do I need in return? What else could I do in order to fulfill that request? Then things start to open up for you. So I would suggest that. The third thing I would say is, this is going to sound a little bit me, but I'll explain why I would say to do this, is know your limits and know what it is that's important to you. And the reason for that is when you go into a deal, you have to know basically what you can and can't do. And the worst thing that you can do for the stakeholders involved is to commit to things that you can't actually fulfill, or is to be so afraid of saying yes that you actually don't move at all. You just stand there and say, no, I have to have it this way or nothing else. The more you know about your position, the more you know about your limits, the greater flexibility you're going to have, and the better position you're going to be in to be able to trade something, again, of lesser value to you that might be of higher value to the other side. So you can do those three things: ask about the other side, find a way to say yes, know what's important to you and your limits. You're going to set yourself off on a path to being a more conscious negotiator and setting up deals that are more win-win-win-win.
Awesome. Look, I've asked a ton of questions of you today. Why don't I bring Alexander back in? I'm sure there's probably some questions in the Q&A or in the chat that people have that are probably far better than the ones that I've asked you. Alexander?
This has been such a rich conversation. Thank you so much, Kwame and Brian. And we do have questions coming in with the chat right now. So for anyone who has any questions to follow up on, feel free to enter them in the Q&A box. That's where we're going to be taking them from. And I want to start with a question from Max in London, who says that negotiations are dynamic and the expected outcome can often be different to the actual outcome. So should one only enter a negotiation if they have understood what the other party wants and is certain that mutual value can be created through negotiation as an outcome?
Great question, Max. So first of all, the premise is, do we fully understand what that mutual value is going to be? Often than not, we will walk into a negotiation not fully understanding all of that. So I wouldn't say that you would not then go negotiate. What I would do is early on in the process is try and establish, again, what's important to them, as well as communicating what's important to me. I like to tell people a lot, tell the other side what it is that you want, just not how badly you want it. So badly becomes about, how badly you want something becomes about intent versus just telling people, here's the things I want to get out of this negotiation. Sometimes you may have to trade for information to find out what is important to the other side. You're going to walk in, think about this. And Alexander, I know you run into this when you talk to other leaders who want to be conscious, is that there's this trepidation to take the first step of being conscious, because there's a fear that they're going to work with other companies who aren't conscious and are going to take advantage of our consciousness. Well, consciousness is not about weakness. It's about mindfulness, and it's about being aware of all the stakeholders who are involved in the process. And so sometimes we have to do that mutual discovery in a negotiation. We have to do that right up front. And that would be my advice, is try and find out what those things are ahead of time to see if you can actually craft deals together that are going to be things that you both can support. But you don't necessarily need to know that all up front, but spend time thinking about it, test your assumptions, and discover that right at the onset.
Thank you, Brian. And this next question is for both of you. One of our attendees is wondering, what do you do in negotiating with people who are different than you? Not everyone is a bald man with beards. How do you negotiate with those who are different and maybe aren't as effective negotiators?
So for clarity, not everybody on this call is bald. I'm still holding on to some hair. Well, look, it's funny, and Kwame, I'd love to get your point of view on this. Kwame and I actually spent a lot of time talking about, when we think about this from a social norms perspective, we spend a lot of time talking about all the different sorts of differences that exist out there, and the, how can people from different backgrounds, different experiences, different economic or social backgrounds be able to come together and even just interact and engage and be together. Well, those same sort of lessons that Kwame and I tend to talk about, you'll find in a negotiation as well. There's only really one thing that needs to exist, in my personal opinion, in order for two parties to negotiate, and that is they both want to get to a deal. They both want to have some sort of outcome. And if they have that desire of wanting to work together, then the path to get there is about understanding each other's needs, priorities, motivations, and then adapting according to the other side as best that you possibly can. I don't think that's any different from some of the stuff you and I have talked about, Kwame. I mean, if two sides have a difference, the first thing that's required is they both want to be able to come together to resolve that.
Yeah, look, Brian, I think you're spot on. There has to be that want, but there also has to be that base understanding, which I think goes back to what you mentioned the first portion of the conversation, which is do your research on the way into the conversation, but then also as you discover new information, be open to adjusting. When I think about, one of the hot button, one of the hottest words these days is diversity. I want a diverse workforce. I want, we're committed to diversity. Well, some negotiations are quick, but some negotiations are long terms. They're marathons, right? Diversity is a marathon. So you have to be committed to diversity. It can't just be, all right, well, look, I want a bunch of diverse candidates, and all of a sudden you get 100 people who are diverse. You have to be able to build the foundation, the comfort, the understanding, to have the long-term benefit of that. I think that's the things that you talk about. So for me, it's about understanding the other side, gathering as much information as you possibly can to get to the ultimate win-win-win solution.
Yeah, totally agree. If you both want to be together, work together, then a negotiation can happen. Everything else becomes about our style and our approach and how we get there together.
Yeah, our style.
Yeah. Not about beards and bald heads.
So another attendee actually has a question, I think, that delves into that point in particular and really tests this, because they're wondering, can you discuss an instance or instances where one party in the negotiation wants a say in something or control over something that intrudes over the other party's area of responsibility for which they're accountable, such as the regulated versus the regulated? How do you deal with something that seems as implacable as that?
So I'll have to speak in generalities and not understanding all the specifics of it. But this goes to what Kwame and I were illustrating before with regards to being able to put basically a price on demands. How can I say yes to that? And that's probably the first place that I would start. Now, if there is no possible way, and I've said this throughout our conversation today, you may not be able to say yes to everything. Then what's important to do is to structure the expectations of what you can and can't do. And there are techniques for being able to tell somebody that I can talk about all kinds of other things, but this one thing. And this is out of bounds. Sometimes people call it a non-negotiable, if you will. But this is out of bounds, but I can talk about all these other elements. And if we can talk about the other elements with you understanding that this is out of bounds, then let's have a conversation. If they can't, if their real desire is to impose their will and do those sorts of things, then it goes back to what we just said before, is you don't have a mutual connection for wanting to do that particular deal, and you may have to explore a different route. But I would say first try and figure out a way to say yes. If you can't, then let them manage your expectations of what you can and can't do, but show them that you're willing to be flexible in other areas that they may not have considered. Because sometimes people ask for things not knowing the implications of it. They ask for things because, well, that's what I was told to do. And they don't really understand everything else that comes along with it. So oftentimes we have to manage those expectations. And that's usually a way through that.
Yeah, if I could just add one piece, and again, coming from the HR person standpoint, I'm always talking to my managers about making sure that your employees understand what the overall goal is, right? So then they ask actually thoughtful questions to ultimately get you to the goal. Because if you're operating in a silo and you constantly want to go in and do the work for them, again, the managed versus the managed, right? Or those being managed, then all right, well, what do we need them there for? So it's important that they better understand what the overall outcome is. And again, going back to you, Brian, the overall outcome is a win-win scenario, right? So make sure that everyone is as educated as they possibly can be as you go through the negotiations to ultimately get to that win.
That's a great point. Good ad.
Fantastic. Thank you. Max actually has another question that I want to go to, which is, do we know how to negotiate better at a younger age as we learn to compromise and then start to learn to say no more often, lose our flexibility to go maybe, pause, and try to turn most situations into a yes? So I'm really curious what each of you thinks about that.
It's funny, we often talk about our natural negotiation abilities probably top out about 8 or 9 years old, because that's the point where you start to understand the implications of your actions. And so when we're younger and somebody says no, we don't know really what that means. We're like, okay, that's a word. So let me ask the next question next. In what kids are really great at is badgering and just kind of keep going. They also have some innate elements about them where they look for the weaker arguments in order to flip the big argument. So I remember a story with one of my daughters, and they're both great negotiators, by the way. But one of my daughters had asked me we were out and about and asked for some ice cream. And I said, no, can't have any ice cream, sorry. But why not? Well, I started first with a great parental answer of, well, because I said so. And then she's like, but how come? I said, well, look, if you eat the ice cream now, you're going to spoil your dinner. Okay, but no, I won't. So can I have it? Like, no. Well, why not? Well, I don't want to, your mother's going to yell at me if I wind up saying yes and giving you ice cream. And then she smartly goes, well, we don't have to tell mom now, do we? And so she looked for the weaker of my arguments to try and flip this whole thing. And kids are just really good at that. I think as we get older as adults and we start to realize the implications of our actions, no becomes a little bit more intimidating, because that means we have to have the courage to push back on it. There starts to become social norms that start to exist for us that we have to overcome as well. So it's not that kids are better, it's just kids are maybe less aware of some of the implications of our actions. But the older we get, the more our emotional IQ goes up and the more tools we have at our disposal. So handling no and doing those sorts of things, that's a minor aspect. As we grow older and mature, there's so many more things that we can pull into our deal making that just makes us better.
So Alexander, let me make it clear. It's really Kennedy and Cooper that you need to be talking to when it comes to understanding negotiations here.
Yeah, you found the secrets.
This is a really interesting one, because I've got this one question that I always ask people that I'm interviewing, and it goes to kind of the core of Max's question here. I asked them, all right, well, when you were a kid, what was it that you wanted to be? Because that gives me the purest sense before, Brian and I started to tell them, no, they can't do this or go this way or go that route. And not necessarily Brian and I, but your parents and your teachers begin to influence you. So I'm always trying to get to the core of truly who you are. And asking a question like that really gets somebody to go back to when they were younger and their thinking was more pure. So I certainly would agree with Brian in terms of the negotiation piece, but we always want to get to kind of what's the core and the pure thinking.
Well, if we build on that a little bit more, Kwame, think about, how did we learn how to negotiate? It was by watching others, by trying things. And I think the hardest thing that we can do as adults is to change. Making a choice to be a conscious capitalist company is not something that you take lightheartedly.
Sure.
Choosing to be mindful is not just about waking up one day and going, I'm going to be mindful. Like, you actually have to take action against that in order to make that happen. And so I think the hardest thing to do is to ask people who want to be better negotiators, better HR professionals, better managers, leaders, employees, husbands, wives, sons, all of those things, is recognizing that it requires different action. And I think that's probably the hardest thing for anybody to do, is take that first step to make that change.
So I know we're coming up near the end of our time, but I want to ask one more question from Sandra, who's wondering if you have any recommendations where one party is in a power position and holds a firm line on all points and seems unwilling to negotiate terms. And is there anything that you have data on regarding gender differences in negotiating that might relate to this?
Okay,
Ooh.
hold on. I got to jump in here first, right? So when Brian and I used to work together, our offices were next to each other, and my office was always super cold. I was like, why is it so cold in here? Brian, you want to take it from here?
That's because the thermostat was in my office, so I had all the power and control. Thanks for that, Kwame. So first, let me start with the second part with regards to gender differences in negotiating. And Alexander, I don't know if it's okay or not, but we're doing actually a webinar towards the end of this month about women in negotiating. And I think there'll be some of that will actually come out in that conversation, which would be great. When we start talking about people having all the power, so first of all, it's about understanding what is the real power, if you will. What are we talking about? Because when we talk about somebody having all the power, that means they're in their ideal position. They can ask for everything they want. What I'm hearing in this question is that it's somebody who's holding steadfast to a position. They may or may not have all the power, and it's really understanding a few things. If they truly have all the power, why are they here at the table with you? There's obviously something they either want from you, or there's something that they're trying to avoid you doing to them. And so do the inverse of what I recommended, which was thinking about the other party, and now think about, well, why is it they want? Why are they talking to me? Why is this even a negotiation? Because within that, you'll start to find your kernels of power. And then there's other elements, which we don't have time to get into, but there's hard sources of power, soft sources of power, and we can go through and look at all of those things to figure out what levers we need to pull. But it really starts with, why are they talking to me? What's their motivation to talk to me? And that's where you start to find ways to create flexibility to get them move off of positions.
I want to, oh, Kwame, please.
Oh. The only other piece that I was going to add to that is, and just kind of to talk about it from a people standpoint, is about value, right? So I read something the other day is, I don't want to be rich, I want to be valuable. So what does that mean? The money goes away, but the value that I bring to the situation never goes away. So understanding your position of value really will give you the position. It'll flip, just like Brian said, it'll flip the position of power.
All right, I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to every question that people were submitting. Brian and Kwame, there were a lot that people were interested in and got so much from this conversation. I want to respect your time though and say thank you so much for giving us your time and your wisdom today, and thank everyone who joined us to participate in this virtual gathering.
Thank you very much, Alexander. It was great. Great forum, great platform. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I hope you both have a great day, and everyone who's listening does too. If you're a participant, please click on the survey that Michael Higgs shared in the chat box to give us feedback on how we can keep making these events better. And I look forward to seeing you on next week's virtual gathering.